Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to this tutorial where we will cover uniform or constant buffers. So, uniform buffers are just like usual buffers, which we had the last time, if you remember, and they were set up per vertex here, right? And the thing with the constant or global buffers, uniform buffers, depending on the basically low-level language that you use, it's just a buffer that's kind of global. You set it once per shader and then it persists. So it's not like this per vertex, rather it's you set it for the shader and then it's applied to all of these vertexes until you change it, right? So with that said, let's discuss how are we going to use them, and we're going to do texture tiling. So we're going to have this texture, but we're going to repeat it. So we will draw this small part, this small part, this small part, right? And then yeah, we will see how it will look like. So let's get started, and for that I'm just going to create a small class which is going to be uniform buffers. So we can you can also call them constant or global buffers, right? In metal and DirectX they're called constant buffers. So you will see sometimes constant, sometimes uniform, but they're basically the same, and the idea behind them is the same. So let's just go with it, and then we're going to have our uniform buffer class. So what are we going to do here? So we're just going to create one. So we're going to need to expose that buffer. So this is just going to be our wrapper object around the buffer, or convenience object. And so I'm just going to make this private because we're going to need it. And then we can create a buffer. And as usual, we just use the size. You can also paste label if you want for debugging. So I might do that actually. So I'm just going to say label here string, and by default it's going to be uniform buffer. Sometimes it's easier because you can debug stuff. All right, it's of type uniform and copy destination. All right, so this uniform must be set, and copy destination means that we can copy to our GPU from the CPU, and we're going to have one small method update. So I'm just going to create that update, and here we can just take data. Usually it's going to be float 32 array. So I'm not sure if we're going to use any other type, so I would just leave it as this. And then we can write it, and here I don't care actually about these offsets. You can leave it if you want, but basically idea but if this is offset, and then you also have parameters for basic. So yeah, you have parameters for data size as well, right? So you can select subsection of this data buffer. But with that said, that's it. I also wanted to add two small math functions. So we're going to use we're going to wrap this float array into some math like objects, and the first one is going to be vector2. So basically when you work with this low level stuff, you cannot just pass any array like you would usually use in JavaScript. So you really need to use this float 32 arrays, or any other which is signed like uint32 array depending on your data type. And here, so I'm just going to create, instead of using math library, I'm going to create my own classes a bit, and then we're just going to extend from that float32 array, right? Because the type needs to be here. And maybe I should just make this a little bit bigger. Appearance. Let's zoom in a bit so that it's easier for you to see. And I'm going to have constructor. So it's already prefixed it, so I'm just going to check it. So xy, so super2, it's going to have the size of 2 for x and y, and then we set the array. So this getter, it's good suggestion. This is as well, and this as well. And I think that should be it. So you can just write this out, or you can also check the code on the GitHub, because this is not super important and super advanced. And then let's go further. Let's actually modify our shader a bit. So we had this group in the fragment shader, but because the next variable is going to be in the vertex shader, let's just change this group to 1. And then here, I'm just going to have some variable which I'm going to call texture tiling. So it's uniform. So you need to do this. And then I'm going to call it texture tiling. And it's going to be of vector type 2. So we need to specify group 0 and then binding 0. And then here, where we output the texture coordinates, we can just say time texture tiling. All right, we're good now. And the next step, what we need to do is modify our unlit render. So for our unlit render pipeline, right, let me just take a look at the nodes because there is quite some work here. So we're going to need to have, we have this diffuse texture color, so we're going to need to have some value. First of all, we're going to need that buffer. So we're just going to say texture tiling buffer is of type uniform buffer. And we're going to need the value for texture tiling. So I'm using this underscore because we're going to need to have getters and setters. And we can just by default set to 1, 1. So, or actually we can just go with the setter, sorry. So whenever we pass the value, we're going to set this texture tiling value. And then we also need to update this buffer. All right. That covers it. So next step is probably to create a buffer. So we can say immediately here in the constructor at the beginning, we can say our texture tiling buffer is new uniform buffer. We can pass the device, texture tiling, and then the label as well. All right. That covers it. And now we need to create those bind groups and layouts like usual. So somewhere over here, before this texture bind group layout, we're going to create our buffer layout. So texture tiling, I can just say group layout, this device, create bind group layout. So our entries, it's going to be binding 0. So visibility is not fragment, it's actually in the vertex shader as I mentioned. And the binding is, you can just pass empty buffer here. So we don't need to do this like for the texture, because when you change texture, you kind of need to create a new bind group for the texture. But buffers, since it's already created, we just write to the same buffer, so we don't need to reference it locally like this one. So we can just leave it here. We're going to copy this. And then we have these bind groups, right? So just as a reminder, so this is like saying group 0 in the shader and then group 1 because of the layout here and as well here, right? If you remember when we were setting this stuff, sorry, here. All right, sorry for jumping. So we created our texture bind group layout, we pasted. So we need to create our bind group. And our bind group is just going to be this. And I actually, have I created a variable for it? I haven't. So maybe I can I'm just going to do it here. Private texture tiling bind group. We're going to need this. Set it here. Device create bind group. Our layout is texture tiling group layout. And then we're saying, okay, entries, first one. So we have only one binding. You remember, we had set group 0 and binding to 0. So binding 0. And then the resource, it's just buffer. And now we're saying, okay, this bind group is going to use our texture tiling buffer. And one final step, we just need to pass it to the shader. Set bind group. And this actually needs to be reversed. Because I moved, if you remember in shader, I moved this to group 1 and this is at group 0. If I save, it works, no effect. But if I now go to our main, let's check in our main, and we had this setter texture tiling. So I can just go here, only the pipeline texture tiling is equal to new vector255. Okay, it kind of works. So the reason why is it like this is because of our sampler, right? We had this idea of a texture and sampler. A sampler is the guy or the object that decides what to do when we're out of the bounds, what to do if it needs to resolve pixel, when you resize something, when something's smaller or larger. So we can just go to our texture 2D. And here somewhere where we were setting sampler, create texture and sampler, let's see. So you will find this method there, create texture and sampler. And here we can say our address mode, EU, first EU, we can just say to repeat, and it's good. And you also have a plenty of options here. So you can say either clamp to edge, then you're not going to see anything, or you can also say mirror repeat, then it's actually mirrored, but I don't want that. I just want to repeat. All right. So that's probably good technique if you want to have a render. Sorry, if you want to render, for example, floors or like something like that, or walls, and then you can repeat this texture pattern over your geometry. So that's one way to do it. All right. So the second thing that I wanted to create is actually just a color. So our material, aside from our texture, we're also going to have color. So let's do just that. And I just don't want to paste color just per vertex. I want to have a global object for that as well. So we can go to our unlit material shader. And here, I'm not going to... I was thinking of maybe pushing this to group 1. But since group 1, we actually create a new binding group every time when we create a texture. So I'm just going to use group 2 instead, and then binding 0. And here we can just say color, or better yet, maybe diffuse color. Since this is diffuse texture, let's just say diffuse color. All right, this should be quick. So we can just multiply. Let's do this. We can multiply here times diffuse color. Everything's broken. That's quite all right for now. So the second thing that I'm going to do here is just create a color. All right, good. We're going to export that color. And we need to extend floater to array, constructor. Yep, this is good. But by default, I just want to be white. So we're just going to set all of this to 1. We're going to say super 4. And then we can set them. And here just create getters and setters, a bit annoying. But like I said, if you don't want to type this out, please just copy from the GitHub. And here I'm just going to say public static read only white, but I'm not going to do it like that. It's actually going to be function, because this is probably not a good idea. Then we would change this value. So really bad suggestion here. So I'm just going to do it like this, white, and it's of type color. All right, and then we're also going to have public static, for example, red color, and we return this. So we're good with the color. All right, next step is just to do the same that we did with our tiling buffer. So we're going to need group, private, diffuse, color, binding group. Then we're going to have to use that color, private diffuse color buffer, uniform buffer, diffuse color. So here it's going to be new. It's actually going to be color, and we can set it to white by default. Let's just import that. And then setter. So when we change the color, we can update the value. I think that we can even avoid this diffuse value, color value. Yeah, you can leave it if you want to have getters, but otherwise you don't even need it. Actually, I'm just going to leave it because I might add setters later, getters later. All right, let's see. So we need to create that bind group layout somewhere after the texture bind group layout. We're going to have diffuse color bind group layout. It's in fragment now, and this buffer is empty as usual. And then we actually need to pass it. Where we need to pass it? Here. All right. So we can say diffuse color bind group layout group 2. I'm missing comma here. All right. And somewhere at the end, we can just create that bind group. Create diffuse color bind group. It's device create bind group layout, diffuse color group layout. And I forgot to create a buffer at the beginning. This. So what are we going to say? Diffuse color, not bind group. Oh my god. Buffer. Actually, let's just focus. Sorry about this. Like I mentioned, it's probably easier sometimes to look at the code from the GitHub. I created the color buffer. Okay. Then diffuse color bind group layout is not existing. Right, something went wrong with the name on my side, so I'm just going to fix that. Diffuse color bind group. Once again. Sorry about this. Sometimes it's annoying because WebGPU has this idea of bind groups. Some other APIs are a bit simpler when it comes to that. I mean, it's not that hard once you get used to it, but it's just a lot of typing and it's kind of error prone at some points. Even worse if you work with C++ bindings, then it becomes really a nightmare, but I think we're good here, almost. All right, it works now. So let's just check that color and confirm that it works. Sunlight pipeline, diffuse color. Let's just set it to red. All right, I need to do this. Okay, perfect. Now it works. So I'm just not going to set it. I'm going to leave it as by default as white. But that's kind of it. So hopefully you understand now this global or uniform buffers, constant buffers, whatever you want to call them. So basically the idea is just when you set them, they're applied to every vertex because they run per shader, right, per pipeline. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you liked it. Next video we're going to be working more with the constant buffers because we're going to need to use matrices for transformations, scaling, rotation, stuff like that. So that's going to be for the next time. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and until next time.